Hey, this is Professor Homa. Welcome to CSC235 Advanced Web Programming. We'll be focusing on JavaScript right now. And one of the places that I want to show you or just give you a little tour of is W3Schools. We use this website for HTML, for CSS, for PHP, for SQL, for lots of different things. It's a great website. It's, it gives you just the amount of information you need. It has a lot of good references, and it also has a little tryout window. So if I go to W3Schools.com and I go to JavaScript, I'll go to Learn JavaScript right now, and it has a little tutorial that you're going to go through, and you could hit the next button. But if you go down the page, it gives you some examples. It shows you a little bit about JavaScript. This is kind of an intro page, but one thing it does mention, which is important because this kind of backs up our reading from the Learning JavaScript book, it shows this 3 languages that web developers kind of use. This is part of the progressive enhancement. The HTML is the content, CSS is the layout and presentation, JavaScript is the behavior. So that's what you've read so far. So this kind of backs that up a little bit, and it has some little bit of history here. There's not as much reading, so if you're not into reading, this website's a little more helpful. I'm going to look at a sample here, and they all have these little try it yourself windows, and what it does is it opens up in a new tab, and it has basically your code little window here, and it has your output window. So whatever you do here will display here. Sometimes you have to run it. Sometimes you even have to refresh, but if you run it, it'll show you what happens. So this little code here, it basically shows, there's not much here. It has a heading that says My First JavaScript, and then it has a button that says Click Me to Display. And what happens when you click this button is it displays this date object. And this is something we'll talk about in one of our early exercises, is that we can basically display something called a date object. JavaScript has a pre-made date object, and we'll even break this down into days and dates and make it format so it doesn't have to look like this computer-generated object here. We'll break down date object into different parts. But anyway, that's what we can do with JavaScript. We could show different things on a page, and it's using something called document.getElementById. It's looking at the document, and it's using a method called getElementById. And it's basically the element is an HTML element, and it has an ID name, and it's looking for that ID name demo, and here it is down here, right? Here's the PID demo. It's a paragraph, and it just has an ID name of demo, and it's basically saying that when you click the button in that paragraph where there's nothing originally, notice there's nothing here, when you click that, and I'll just refresh this page, because initially there's nothing here. The paragraph is here and there's nothing in it. It's an empty paragraph, and then it's just going to display the date object when I hit the button. It has an on-click event here that's actually doing that. So I'll close up this window. When you close up the Try It editor, it goes back to where you were. That's all I need here. JS introduction just goes through. It talks about the getElementById. It's a JavaScript HTML method because it's getting the ID name of an HTML element. It also uses something called inner HTML, which allows us to write to the page. It allows us to write HTML. It also allows us to get HTML code or HTML statements from other places on the page. So we'll use that a little bit too. Here's an example here. It says you could use double quotes or single quotes. Here's a try it yourself thing, and again, this is nothing special. There's a paragraph with an ID name of demo saying JavaScript can change HTML element, and then when you click it, if you look at the code here on click, it says getElementById demo, so it's talking to demo, and the inner HTML is now going to change to hello JavaScript. And you could change it. Now I could go down here and say hello CSC235 class. I could change that because that's what's displaying down here. So I could run it, which will kind of update it, and then hit the click me button, and now it's displaying something else. Okay, I'm going to close that up, and I'll kind of go down here a little bit. There's one with a light bulb. We're not going to do this yet because it has an image to deal with, and we're not going to worry about images quite yet. It also mentions it could change CSS styles. It could show and hide elements. It's a lot of fun things we could do with JavaScript. Under the where to, it talks about where to put the JavaScript. And initially, we're just going to put it inside script tags, opening script tag and a closing script tag in our HTML page. We'll put it right in the body initially. You can put it in the head. Learning JavaScript tells you to put it at the bottom of the body, one of the last things. But initially, with these little blurbs we're going to be doing, this is not a lot of code. We don't have to worry about load time or anything like that. We'll just put it right in the middle of the page of where it's actually going to display, especially if it's displaying HTML. Talks about functions, talks about events, a little bit here. You could go through this a little bit just to get a feel of what's going on. But what I really want to do, and I'll do an exercise with this, is output. They have an example of using this inner HTML and doing output. And they have it, here's the one where it actually just shows you, it's outputting this number 11 on a page. And it's using this document, get element by ID demo. Again, it's looking to this empty paragraph, and it's basically adding inner HTML, and it's adding two numbers together, and it's coming out as 11. Now that's pretty boring, and there's nothing to do here because it's already done. There's no button that's actually there's no event that's making it happen. It's actually getting written right to the page, but it's just an example that JavaScript can write HTML to the page. That's what it's doing. I'll close this one up because that's no fun. And I'll go down here. This is a little bit more fun. It's not that much fun, and these things are a little bit annoying. These window alert things. And I'll go in here just so you see what this is. This is an alert window that comes up, and these are pretty annoying, but they're nice to kind of learn about the events that we use. Now these things basically show up right away, so we didn't have to hit any button for this alert to come up. You can use a button to make an alert come up, but what it's saying is 11, so that doesn't say too much. But what's happening here is there's a script, there's our JavaScript, and it's saying window.alert, and it's adding together two numbers, and it's doing 5 plus 6. And when I run it, it's running an alert that says 11. Now, just a couple things just to point out about this. In that parentheses of what's being alerted, it's basically alerting numbers. Now we're going to talk about objects, and I'll just refer to them as numbers right now. There's different kind of numbers, integers and things like that. But right now we'll just refer to them as numbers, and it's actually adding two numbers. If I took the plus sign out, it would just be 56. Okay, if I put the plus sign back. Now one thing I want to point out here is if let's say you were like, oh, I should probably put quotes around this. If you put quotes around that, it turns it into something called a string object. A string is just text. So if I put quotes around here and I ran it, it would actually say 5 plus 6, because it's actually just indicating the text that's in there. It's not treating it as numbers. So when it's numbers, there's no quotes. When there's strings, there's quotes. Now again, this is pretty boring, just having this pop up. Okay, let's say we want to put your name in here, and I'll just put Rich, because that's my name. I'll put my name in here, and I'll run it, and nothing happens. And the reason nothing happens is because without quotes in there, it sees that it's not a number because there's no numbers in there, and also there's no quotes, so it knows it's not a string either, so it doesn't know what it is. It's actually looking at this as a variable right now, and what a variable is in some cases it's something that could represent something else. It's kind of a holder for something else. So in order to display my name, I'd have to put Rich in here. And I'd run it, and now it says Rich. Now just to show how a variable works, let's make a variable. So I'm going to just, and it has to be inside these script tags, I'm just going to make a variable. So I'm going to do var, and that's basically the keyword saying that whatever's next is going to be a variable. So I'm going to do var, and I'm going to give it a name. This is declaring a variable, and I'll just call it name. So name, just like in algebra you use x, we're using name. Name is going to be our whatever name we have. So the variable name is going to be equal to, and I'll set it to Rich. And then what's going to display in the alert window is I'm actually just going to display, and one thing I forgot here, make sure you put your semicolon to end that statement. That kind of ends it. So what's going to display in this window, I can, instead of putting Rich in here, I could just put name. So that basically means it'll display anything that's the variable name. So if I run it right now, it'll say Rich. If I say, Professor Homa, I'll run it, and it'll say Professor Homa. So basically it's just feeding the variable into there. Now if I put a quote around here, if I screwed up and I was like, oh, it should have a quote, and I ran it, it would say name, because it's looking for the string name, not the variable name. So that's just a couple things that we're going to work with. So we're going to work with this on our first exercise. This is not our first exercise, but we're going to take this and we're actually going to go to a website called js.do, and what we're going to do is I'm going to have you register and then sign up so that you can actually save code and just send me the URL, and without having to use a code editor, at least in the beginning. We'll use a code editor and all that, but at least in the beginning we can just kind of, work just in a browser. You could do this anywhere, so it's not something that you have to necessarily do and worry about all kinds of software at this point. So we're going to be working with some of this. We'll be copying some code from here and putting it in another editor, and that's what we're going to do with our first exercise. But I just wanted to give you a little start